I'm Harvey Persons here today with News and Views with the Mayor, and we're going to talk about a $40 billion industry that's growing and expanding right here in Georgia. So $40 billion a year nationwide industry with over $1 billion in sales right here in Georgia. We're going to talk about how it's growing and expanding in our local communities, as well as the state, and as well as nationwide. So stay with us. Hopefully you're going to learn some things about this industry, and I think you're going to be shocked to find out what this industry really is. So stay tuned and join us. We have two exciting guests that'll help us tell you what's going on in our community, but more importantly, what we're doing to have an effect and change on this industry. Stay tuned.
This is why you took a second job. While you taught yourself how to fix the plumbing. While you'll do whatever it takes to keep your home. And that is why we want to help. We are making home affordable, a free government resource that can make paying the mortgage easier. Call 888-995-HOPE today.
Here we are today with News and Views with the Mayor. I'm Harvey Persons, Mayor of the City of Douglasville, and we're very fortunate to have with us today two very important ladies who are very qualified and capable in the industry that they're involved with. And it's an exciting industry. It's over a $40 billion a year industry. It's over $1 billion industry in the state of Georgia. And Atlanta ranks number 5 in the entire world with this industry. Now, does that get you excited about the industry that we're going to talk about today? I hope so, because you're going to find out more about this industry that we're going to talk about. Now, the interesting thing about this industry is it's not one that you talk about as a general rule with your kids, probably one you're not even that familiar with. It's not one that you talk about that much around the dinner table. Mm-hmm. It's not one that, and I believe our guests will agree with us, it's not one that you really is the topic of conversation at your local church, synagogue, or place of worship, whatever it may be. It's really not even discussed that much at schools. So you're probably asking yourself now, how in the world is it a $40 billion a year industry in our country, $1 billion a year industry in the state of Georgia, and Atlanta ranks number 5 in the world with this industry? Have I got your attention? I hope so. Because today we're going to talk about the sex trafficking industry in our communities. Yes, I said our communities, because it's happening all over the country. It's happening all over Atlanta, and it's happening right here in Douglasville. And it has a dramatic, distasteful impact on our communities. So enough said about that. Let's get more into it. Today we have with us Miss Heather Stockwell, who's the Executive Director for Georgia Cares, and then we're going to let her tell us a little bit about Georgia Cares, how it got started, and exactly what she does with it. And then we're going to talk to Miss Jennifer Bateman, who is a development psychologist, and we've already joked she's probably been getting in our heads and figuring out what makes us work. But more importantly, she's going to talk to us about training and what we're doing to heighten the awareness about this very, very distasteful industry. The facts and the information that I gave you opening up was to get your attention, because it is a tremendous industry as it relates to size and the impact that it has on the youth in our communities. So with that being said, Ms. Stockwell, tell us a little bit about Georgia Cares, how it got started, and what you do with Georgia Cares.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us here today. We're excited to meet with you and talk about the topic and appreciate the opportunity to educate Douglasville. So Georgia Cares was started in 2009. It really came out of the state of Georgia and our then governor, Sonny Perdue, looking at this issue in our state. So his questions were, is this happening? What does this look like? And really the state started looking at really this continuum of child sex trafficking. So from prevention to intervention, making sure that we were intervening, and these kids weren't falling through the cracks, all the way to demand reduction. So what we were doing with the criminals, the buyers and the sellers of these children for the purposes of sex. And so they looked at this whole huge continuum and said, wow, this is a huge problem. We know that it's happening. We need to do something about it. But most importantly, they felt like there were kids that were being victimized that were really falling through the cracks of our state system. So Department of Juvenile Justice, Department of Family and Children's Services, for example. So the state created a statewide organization that would be the single point of entry where all kids who were victimized would come through that system. So that is how Georgia Cares was born. So in 2009, we opened up, and in August, we started accepting referrals. And we often joke that they thought that maybe in the first year we would see 10 victims. In the first year, we saw over 100 victims. And since 2010, our referrals for children have tripled. So in last year alone, we received 340 new referrals from children, for children that are victims. So we keep seeing those numbers increase. For us, it means that the awareness that you spoke of and the education is increasing with our community members. We know that these kids are out there and being victimized, so we like to see our numbers increase because those are more children that we can reach and serve.
And that's something that I want our viewers to realize. Certainly, this is not a topic that, like I said, that you like to talk about. It's not the topic of conversation at the dinner table. It's not the topic of conversation with your churches. I know I've talked to my friends about it, and they've said, gosh, never really thought about it. Well, it's not because of a lack of wanting to, it's a lack of understanding, it's a lack of awareness, it's a lack of knowledge. It's kind of like there's an old saying, if you don't know what you don't know, you can't ask the questions.
Yeah.
And with this, if you don't know it even exists, how do you talk about it? Or how do you get trained on it? We know about drug trafficking.
Yeah.
You know, we want to get the drug traffickers. We want to get the users and the traffickers. We know about speeding offenses. We know about traffic fatalities. We know about DUIs. But what do we know about sex trafficking? And it's not a topic that, like I said, you really want to talk about. But if you don't talk about it, it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
If we don't heighten the awareness, if we don't train our law enforcement community, if we don't heighten the awareness within our churches, within our schools, and like you said, the number of victims keeps going up that we know about. They've been out there. It's just that awareness hasn't been out there. So what do we do? How do we heighten the awareness?
Well, I think one such solution are the community training series that we've kicked off at Georgia Cares, aimed, like you said, just at educating communities, but also about increasing a collaborative effort. So recently, we just put on a training with Douglasville.
When did you do your first one?
We did the first one with Douglasville. We kicked it off with Douglasville.
Great. Thank you.
We were grateful that you all hosted us. And like I said, you've had such a great collaborative effort and all the things that you guys have going on. It's a really tight-knit community full of people that care about issues and care about this issue and wanted to learn more. So Jen actually facilitated our training.
Very good. Well, Jen, tell us a little bit about your experience. What's your background? How did you get involved in this?
So I'm a youth development expert, and I primarily work with youth-serving organizations, and that's why this is such an important issue, because a lot of our organizations that serve youth, even healthcare organizations, after-school programs, educational institutions, people that work in those capacities still think of this as a special population or something that doesn't affect their community and don't have that type of knowledge, and we need to touch every organization, every person that comes into contact with youth to help them become aware of the warning signs and help them to know what to look for and what youth are at risk for this, because we all have the capacity to intervene when we have that knowledge.
And what you just said, I think that so many times we've seen youth, even our law enforcement community, not as a negative, but just because of their lack of awareness of what's going on. Sometimes they see youth that are engaged in prostitution, drugs, excessive alcohol use or whatnot, but don't realize that some of these things are the telltale signs of abuse and sex trafficking that are going on.
Exactly.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
We start to think of those as bad kids or kids that are having problems, but not necessarily that those are symptoms of something else that's happening behind the scenes. And actually, you're right, those are the warning signs that kids have had some sort of abuse, some sort of trauma, or are involved in this unfortunate situation. And not to think of those kids according to the stereotypes and myths and those misperceptions, but to really dig into that and ask what could be going on that's causing these issues.
So, with your training, what exactly do you do to heighten that awareness?
Well, we cover the warning signs for sure, though it's really important to note that because all children are vulnerable, all children are at risk. Although 80 to 90% of victims have a history of sexual abuse, that doesn't mean that you have to have had a history of sexual abuse to be a victim and to be vulnerable, because children are inherently vulnerable. They all need mutual belonging. They all want to be with somebody that they trust and someone to care for them. So when those opportunities present themselves, it makes children vulnerable to those situations.
You mentioned that Georgia Cares is going to do a training in I guess, different programs around the state. Tell us a little bit about that, Heather.
So our community training series that we've been talking about kicked off and in Douglasville, as we said, and we'll be we'll be going all over the state to different communities. So our next one, for example, is in Macon, Georgia. So we really want to go all across the state, different communities that have different landscapes and have different levels of understanding and education on the issue, and train them, like Jen said, on these warning signs, but also train them that these aren't bad kids. Right. These are victims, and they deserve supportive services and care. And that's what we at Georgia Cares are all about. We're here to help these kids, to provide services, and to follow them throughout their journey of restoration. So what we want to do is train people on what to see, but then also move them to action. What can they do once they see that? What are the options? And for them to know that once they refer that child to Georgia Cares, that child will be taken care of, that will provide those care and services to those kids and help them reintegrate back into society and become successful, productive adults, which is what we want for all of our youth.
Which, and certainly y'all are the experts. I'm not even, I don't even claim to be an expert about it. That's why we look to you to help us increase the awareness and work with the training to help our youth, because I think so many times you have kids out there that feel like nobody cares, or this is happening to me, but who do I go to?
Right. Absolutely.
And we've got to heighten the awareness in our communities, but then in doing that, get it out there to these kids that know that if I am having a problem, or I am being abused, or if I am being trafficked, who do I go to?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And if they don't realize that there's somebody out there to help them, then the cycle just perpetuates itself. And the same thing with our law enforcement community. And that's one of the things here in Douglasville that we're working to do, is to heighten that training within our law enforcement community. And to our viewers, you may ask, well, how is that? But to give you an example, say on a traffic stop, and an officer stops a car for speeding, and maybe there are 2 adults in it, and maybe a minor or 2 minors. And on the surface, it may seem perfectly innocent. But if they're trained to look for certain telltale signs, think, so now instead of just an ordinary traffic stop, okay, well, let's separate the individuals and then start talking and looking at the telltale signs from the training that they've gotten. And then all of a sudden, we find out instead of an ordinary traffic stop, we've got a case of sex trafficking, human trafficking. And like I said, it's a $40 billion-a-year industry in our country. It's a billion-a-year industry in the state of Georgia, and it's Atlanta. And I say Atlanta, the Atlanta region is ranked number 5 in the world. Folks, this is not an industry we want to promote. This is an industry we want to destroy and eradicate. But the way we do it is by heightening the awareness and training, right? So tell us a little bit more about Georgia Cares and your training and whatnot that you're going around the state. What are some of the other things that you do?
So in addition to the training and awareness that we do, because education is key, really the core of what we do is victim support and restoration.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we assist our law enforcement partners. Like you said, that's a great example that you gave. But in that instance, law enforcement needs to do their law enforcement work. They need to investigate. They need to go after that criminal. And in order to do that, they need a victim service organization that can help and take care of that kid so that they know that that victim is in a safe place and is being cared for. And that's where we come in. So when law enforcement does a sting or an operation and they recover a juvenile who's been trafficked, they call us. We work with Department of Family and Children's Services and our medical community, namely Children's Health Care of Atlanta, and we make sure that that child has access to medical care, and then we find them a safe place to be. Many of these kids are living on the streets and are found in a hotel at 2 a.m. Not a safe, good place for a kid to be. So we make sure to get them into supportive, safe home housing where they can be away from their trafficker and they have months to focus on their treatment and recovery there. So basically, our staff are licensed social workers. They work one-on-one with these kids. They work with them and incorporate their voice for their dreams and their goals, make a plan for that child, and make sure that we are wrapping care to meet all dimensions of child well-being. So we really want there to be services to address their educational needs, their mental health needs, their physical needs, any needs that they might have. And we make sure that there are providers and services for that kid. And then we follow them throughout their journey. So that's really the crux of what we do, and the center of our work is working with victims with that support.
Well, let's talk a little bit about another aspect of it, in that we've talked about the victims. We've talked about the training and working with the communities, but so that our viewers know and understand, there's a concerted effort that's going on in the law enforcement community. And it's my understanding that the GBI actually has a small dedicated task force, if you will, that's looking to addressing it and also working to help train our local law enforcement agencies around the state. And that's something that Georgia Cares, I believe, is working with and advocating not only the victims and the rehabilitation of the victims and caring for, but we're going to get to the bad guys.
Absolutely. They've done a great job. We have GBI, which is our state law enforcement agency. And we also are very blessed in Atlanta and Georgia to have the FBI have an office here as well. And our law enforcement partners are just incredible. They work day in and day out these cases. They are dedicated to getting the criminals, both the buyers and the traffickers, and putting them away for a long time. So we need to support them in those efforts. There is a Metro Atlanta task force that the FBI runs, and GBI has an entire unit that's dedicated to trafficking, and they have some incredible agents, and their great leadership through Director Keenan has really allowed them to focus on this issue and to make some great cases for our state as well.
Well, that's the thing. There's a lot of people doing a lot of great things with this, and how I originally got into it, I'm on something called the Legislative Policy Committee through GMA, and GMA, as you're familiar with, and GMA's gotten on board with this.
Absolutely.
And GMA, we started talking about it about 2.5 years ago, and we've actually made it a policy issue through the Georgia Municipal Association, and then encouraging our state legislators to deal with it, to deal with laws, to be very proactive in it. But then we're working within our local municipal association to increase and heighten the awareness of cities all over Georgia.
Yeah.
And this is just part of that process. And Douglasville and our community wants to do all that we can do to support your efforts. So Jennifer, tell me a little bit more about some of the training in the few minutes that we've got left.
Well, we want to reach beyond just certain organizations. We really want to reach everybody that in some way comes into contact with youth, because it's like you said, we're not talking about it at the dinner tables, but until we get to the point where everybody is talking about it, anybody that has some contact with youth is talking about it at the dinner tables, in public transportation, with their peer groups, and changing some of the language around it so it's not so stigmatized. Right. So, for example, you often hear teen prostitute rather than the victim. They're not the prostitutes, they're the victims. And this keeps people from coming forward, and it spreads misperceptions. So changing the language kind of goes hand in hand with having more of those conversations in informal and formal settings. And that's really what the training's about, is reaching everybody that reaches youth, so that a lot of the risk factors that these youth are faced with have negative outcomes beyond just being at risk for sex trafficking. They undermine their adaptive well-being across the course of their lives. So we really need to intervene early on so that our kids are set up for success and positive youth development holistically and in every capacity.
And we want to teach these communities that they have a voice in this.
Yes.
There is room for them in the fight, and that we need every person to decrease the demand for sex with kids, to increase services for victims, and for us to actually, as a state, start to decrease this crime from happening. And I think at the end of the training, we talk a lot about individual impact, what individuals can do. And there are so many options for people to get involved, and that's what we really want to leave with them.
Well, that's the thing, and in closing, want to get across to our viewers, certainly it's a huge industry, but it's not the kind of industry we want. It doesn't have positive impacts to our communities. It has negative impacts.
Absolutely.
So as we talk about economic, bringing economic industry into our communities and bringing jobs, these are not the kinds we want.
Absolutely.
These are the kinds of jobs, and they are jobs, but they're not the kind of jobs that you want. They're not the kind of jobs we want. And we're going to work to eradicate them through heightening and increasing the awareness within our communities, within our law enforcement agencies, and through training. And that's how you do it. And changing some of the verbiage, some of the definitions, and letting people know that in Douglasville, in Douglas County, we're not going to put up with it. And at our recent training that we talked about, I mentioned that we're going to be supportive of it as elected officials. We're going to encourage our law enforcement agency. Our communities are going to be supportive. And if you come to Douglasville and Douglas County, we're going to lock you up. Our DA and our district attorney and solicitors are going to prosecute you, and our judiciary are going to send you to prison. It's not acceptable in Douglasville and Douglas County. And it's folks like Georgia Cares and you, Ms. Bateman, you, Ms. Stockwell, that are doing a tremendous job in helping us heighten the awareness, increase the training, and work to eradicate it in our communities. I applaud you for it. Thank you for the recent training that you put on in Douglasville and Douglas County. And together, working together, and that's the key, is our viewers hear me talk all the time about working together is what helps make Douglasville and Douglas County be one of the premier places in America to live, work, play, raise a family, and be all we can do. Be. And we applaud you for doing what you're doing at the state level to help us do that. So thank you for the recent training. Thank you for being with us today, and we encourage you and let you know what we can do to continue to support your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In closing today, I want to thank Ms. Stockwell and Ms. Bateman for being with us today to talk about a very unpopular industry within our community. I opened talking about it's a $40 billion industry in our country. It's a $1 billion industry in the state of Georgia. In Atlanta, the Atlanta region ranks number 5 in the world in this industry. But you've listened to us talk about today a very nasty industry. This is not something that's a popular topic to talk about. But the way to eradicate it is through heightening the awareness, increasing the training, and getting the total community involved. Working together And with ladies like this, law enforcement, and our whole community, we'll eradicate it and not put up with it in our community and help others around the state to make Georgia #1 in eradicating this industry.